In this video, we're going to discuss the showing agreement newly released by Florida Realtors late yesterday afternoon. So this is our new showing agreement. We're going to work through each section of this. At the very end, we're going to talk about what the difference is between the buyer broker agreement, the showing agreement, and the pre-touring agreement. Here we have the parties to the contract. We have the consumer, which has been replaced. It used to be buyer, it's now consumer. Says consumer agrees that if between blank and 11:50 p.m. on blank, whatever time frame that the broker and the consumer agree to, becomes interested in touring, negotiating to purchase, option, exchange, lease, or other acquisition of any of the properties listed below, the consumer will utilize the professional services of the broker. So you're going to put your broker's name here in addition to your name. Should the consumer enter into either a fully executed contract for sale and purchase or a contract to lease a property listed on paragraph 2, the term of this agreement will automatically extend through the date of the actual closing or lease execution by all parties. Similar to our listing agreement and the buyer broker agreement, once a consumer is under contract, the agreement you have with that consumer extend through the closing of that property. Section 2 here, you have the property. This agreement applies to the following properties. I would be very specific here. I would include an MLS number. I would include the property address and perhaps even the legal description. Okay, number 3, the broker's obligation. This is going to look similar to, but slightly different than the broker obligation under the buyer broker agreement. If the consumer wants to negotiate a transaction on any of the above properties, the broker will use the broker's professional knowledge and skills, use diligent effort to show the consumer the above described properties, assist consumer in negotiating and closing any resulting transaction, and cooperating with real estate licensees working with the owner, if any, to complete the transaction. Other consumer agrees that the broker may work with other prospective consumers who want to acquire the same property as the consumer. Consumer agrees that the broker may make competing consumers aware of the existence of any offer consumer makes, so long as the broker does not reveal any material terms or conditions of the offer without the consumer's prior written consent. Fair housing. The broker adheres to the principles expressed in the Fair Housing Act and will not participate in any act that is unlawfully discriminates on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, country of national origin, or any other category protected under federal, state, or local law. Service providers. The broker does not warrant or guarantee products or services provided by any third party whom the broker refers or recommends to the consumer in connection with property acquisition. We have our consumer obligations. Consumer agrees to cooperate with the broker in accomplishing the objectives of this agreement, including immediately contacting the broker upon deciding to negotiate for the acquisition of one or more of the above listed properties, informing any other real estate licensee with whom the consumer has contact. The consumer has contracted to work with the broker in regard to the properties listed above, providing the broker and necessary third parties, any lender, closing agent, with accurate information requested by the broker or third parties in connection with ensuring the consumer's ability to acquire property. The consumer authorizes the broker to run a credit check to verify the consumer's credit information. We know we typically don't do that, but it's included in the buyer broker agreement as well. Indemnify and holding broker harmless for losses, damages, costs, and expenses of any nature that the broker incurs because of the consumer's negligence, misrepresentation, or default of any agreement. Consulting appropriate professionals for legal, tax, environmental, engineering, foreign reporting requirements, or other specialized advice, and making a diligent, good faith effort to perform the contract terms of any purchase agreement or contract to lease and close on the sale of any property the consumer contracts to acquire. We have the compensation portion. The broker's compensation is earned when, during the term of this agreement or any renewal or extension, the consumer or any person acting for on behalf of the consumer contracts to acquire real property as specified in this agreement. The compensation is for broker services for consumer. Compensation received by the broker, if any, from the owner or owner's broker for services rendered to the consumer will reduce any amount owned by the consumer per this paragraph. So, for example, If your agreement with the consumer is that they're going to pay you 50% of the purchase price of the home, and the seller's broker is offering 45%, the consumer is then on the hook for just 5% to make up that difference. Taking a look next at the purchase or exchange. So there's two different sections here. You're going to fill out one or the other, but not both. For the section that you're not using, you could insert zeros or NA for non-applicable. So the first section is purchase or exchange. You're going to charge the consumer either a dollar amount or a percentage of the total purchase price, or you're going to charge a dollar amount or a percentage plus an additional dollar amount, perhaps a transaction fee. So again, you're filling out just one of these two sections, and the other areas where you don't have anything filled out, you're going to put a 0 or an NA. The reason why we do that is we don't want anything to be ambiguous. If for some reason this ends up in a courtroom at some point in time, you don't want to try and explain or remember why you did not fill something out. This just makes it very clear, not only for yourself, but more importantly for the consumer. So whatever the fee is going to be, if the total purchase price or other consideration for the acquired property payable no later than the date of closing specified in the sales contract. However, closing is not a prerequisite for the broker's fee being earned. We saw in the consumer's obligation portion of this agreement that they have to do all of the things that a lender needs and that the realtor needs in order to get this transaction to closing. If the buyer defaults on the contract, they still owe the compensation to the broker. We have a lease option here, and this reads very similarly. You're going to charge a dollar amount or a percentage of however months rent you decide, 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or you're going to charge a dollar amount or percentage plus an additional dollar amount, perhaps a transaction fee, of the gross lease value payable when the consumer enters into a lease with the owner. If the consumer enters into a lease to purchase agreement, the amount of the leasing fee for which the broker receives will be credited toward the amount due broker for the purchase. So this is the same thing. You're going to choose one area or the other. The area that you do not choose, you're going to put zeros or you're going to put NA. Speak with your broker on this. If you're not sure you want to deal with leases, if you're not sure how to handle that piece, your broker can guide you there. Let's take a look at the retainer. A non-refundable retainer fee of whatever you and the consumer agree to for broker services provided for the consumer is earned and payable upon execution of this agreement. This retainer is in addition to any compensation earned by the broker. The broker and consumer agree the retainer is for real estate services described herein and does not constitute a fee paid for rental information list as described in section 475.453 of the Florida statute. This is an option. If you choose not to charge a retainer fee, I would put 0 in this category. If you do choose to charge a retainer fee, put the dollar amount here, and remember that money is going to be collected upon execution of this agreement. So make sure you have that conversation with your broker and know what you should do with that monies and how that money should be collected and given to your broker so your broker can then pay you, because remember, all sales associates, broker associates get paid from their broker. We have additional terms here. At the beginning of this agreement, they did talk about an option. They don't have a specific place for the details of an option in this agreement. So perhaps if an option was going to be created, it would be in the additional terms. We have our dispute resolution section, and per Florida law, all disputes are going to go to mediation before anything else happens. If the broker and consumer initials in this area, if mediation does not work, then the matter will automatically go to binding arbitration. If nobody initials here, it is more likely that you are going to go to litigation, which is more expensive and takes more time. So a lot of brokers are deciding to go to arbitration instead. But again, that is a broker-specific decision. Speak with your broker and find out how they'd like you to handle that. Number 9, acknowledgement modifications. Consumer has read this agreement and understands its contents. This agreement cannot be changed except by written agreement signed by both parties. Electronic signatures will be acceptable and binding. The broker's commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Broker may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount of the rate agreed with the consumer. However, the consumer agrees that the broker may receive separate commission from the owner of the property for services rendered to the owner by the broker for which the consumer will not be responsible. That last sentence there really addresses if the broker in which the buyer consumer is working with also has the listing. But this is a really important piece here, to say that the broker may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to with the consumer. So again, if the consumer has agreed to pay 50% and what is being offered is 50% plus a $10,000 bonus, the broker cannot receive that $10,000 bonus unless they go back and modify this agreement with the consumer and the consumer agrees to in writing and signs that they are okay with the broker receiving that additional bonus. So I would carry a modification form with me at all times if I were you, because we don't know what might be offered at any given time. All right, and then we have just the area where people are going to date, sign, put their address. A copy is returned to the consumer either by personal delivery, mail, or facsimile. This is very similar to our listing agreement. We know that is there as well. Of course, everyone is going to initial the bottom of every page here. And that brings us to the end of the showing agreement. I'd like to talk for a minute the difference between the exclusive buyer broker agreement, the showing agreement, and the touring agreement. And of course, this is very generalized, right? There's more detail to it, but this gives you a general difference between the three. The exclusive buyer broker agreement is the most comprehensive contract between the consumer and a broker. In this agreement, both parties consent to the broker's compensation regardless of how the consumer discovers or contracts to purchase, lease, or option a property. In contrast, a showing agreement is property specific and details the responsibilities of both the broker and the consumer. However, the consumer's obligation to the broker is limited only to the properties listed in the showing agreement. This type of agreement does not include a protection period or a conditional termination clause. A touring agreement, on the other hand, is established for a specified duration, specifically a predetermined number of days. This form outlines a time frame and the broker's compensation only. That brings us to the end of this video. Please take the time to look at our buyer broker agreement video as well as our pre-touring video.